I'd like to spend a few minutes and offer a perspective on encouraging the opposition or how not to. Given a situation where we're experiencing protests of one sort or another with a desire to maintain control, the typical response is to go ahead and arrest the opposition leaders. And this is typically the initial first action because it's expedient. I mean, it appears as though doing that will go ahead and quell the protests. The difficulty that arises, as Sengi said, seldom can we ever do just one thing. Anytime we take an action, it typically has multiple implications, though, as seems to be our habit, we look at things one-dimensionally and say, here is the problem and here is the solution, and we don't think beyond that. Typically what happens is, given some period of time, arresting the opposition leaders simply creates more political unrest, which will lead to more protests, which leads to more arrests, which leads to more political unrest. So we end up with a vicious reinforcing cycle taking us absolutely in a direction that we have no desire to go. And as I said, it typically turns out because of our one-dimensional mindset in the way that we think about things. So we would have to find some way to deal with the protests in a way that didn't create more political unrest, because that would simply result in more protests over time. This is a typical example of the fixes that fail archetype, where you have a situation and you act on that situation. You typically end up treating symptoms as opposed to the basic underlying problem. And the annoying thing about a fixes that fail structure usually is that the repercussions of your actions are not usually immediate. Sometimes they're days, weeks, or months into the future when it comes back to bite you in the butt. And when that happens, because of the time delay, seldom is it realized that your actions were actually the result of the failure in the future, or unable to realize that it was your actions to deal with the situation in the short term actually made things worse in the longer term. So as I said, to deal with this protest situation, we have to find ways to deal with it which doesn't create more political unrest. So I look forward to your thoughts about some ways that we might go about doing that. And I'll see you in another perspective soon. Bye.